So this is probably the most difficult episode, or at least one of the most difficult episodes for this particular series that I've had to make yet. This is Cindy. Okay, so if you're new to this series and you're not quite sure what's going on right now, I'm going to tell you in just 1 second. However, if you are a veteran to this, if this is not your first kind of introduction to this series, I have a challenge for you. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to throw this photo right here back up on the screen. Now, while I explain to the new folks exactly what we do in this series and why this particular episode is a little bit harder than normal, I want you to go ahead and comment below and tell me, what do you think? Maybe list one of the mistakes that I might see with this particular photo, and then see if you can guess. Okay, so you go ahead and do that right now. Now for the rest of you, if you're new to this series, my name is Justin Hickox and I've been doing hair for 26 years. So in this particular series, subscribers from this channel actually send in photos and ask the question, what mistakes am I making with my hair? And then my goal is to walk through kind of some of those potential mistakes, what they are, and more importantly, how they can address those mistakes or concerns so that they can get a more youthful look. Then I go above that and I try to show you on photos of them, kind of photoshopped, exactly what the suggestions would look like if they took my advice. And then at the very end, we usually throw in some curveballs, some ideas of different styles or things that they could try to just switch things up so that you can kind of learn from what's going on with their hair. Maybe you have similar hair. And the reason this particular situation is so hard is because, honestly, when I looked at these photos, the first thing that popped into my head is, I'm not seeing a whole lot of mistakes. Now, yes, there are some things that I would modify or that I think that you could modify, but, and we'll explain more of this as it goes along, so you're going to understand here a little bit more about what I'm talking about pretty soon. But when you look at the kind of mistakes that I would say, or the things that I would modify, they are things that really could be stylistic choices. It just so happens that in this particular circumstance, I'm not sure if Cindy chose to do this on purpose or if this is just kind of where she landed, but her exact look right now just so happens to be kind of a stylized and more trendy look. If it was a situation where she wanted that kind of current modified bob or that version of a bob, and that's what she was going for, then the shape actually works. Doesn't look bad at all on her. So what I would recommend changing is really more about small nuances, things that I think would be more flattering on her. And this is exactly actually why I'm excited about this particular episode. Because just because this particular stylized look doesn't look bad on her, it's also not to say that modifying a few things to make it a little bit more flattering is also a bad idea. Both of them are going to work well in this situation. They're just going to be different. So I think it's going to be a really good time to kind of point those differences out to folks. Maybe you have been feeling like you want to do a cut that's a little bit more trendy. You saw something and you really, really like that particular trend. It's not to say that just because it's not the most flattering version of that trend, that it's inherently a bad choice. But it is important to know these nuances and kind of why they can be more flattering, and that way you can make the best decision for yourself. Trust me, this will make more sense in a second. I hope that makes sense, but let's talk about the mistakes. Before we dive into the mistakes though, I want you to look at this photo and I want you to tell me what is the first thing that you notice. Okay? Now I want you to keep that in your mind. Now I want you to look at this profile photo and I want you to tell me, where does your eye go? Okay, naturally, where does your eye start to travel in this particular photo? And remember those two things because we're going to talk about those in just a second. Okay, so the first mistake, if you look at this profile picture, I would say is that the length parallels the floor. Okay, it doesn't actually follow the cheekbone structure or the jaw structure, any real structure in the face. It's parallel to the floor, and when that happens, it has a tendency to draw the eye down the shape towards the floor instead of lifting the eye up and accentuating more cheekbone structure and just overall face structure. This so happens to be a kind of popular overall look right now. So if this is a stylistic choice, then there's really nothing broken here. However, with that said, if we're looking at it from more of the perspective of what's more flattering, then actually having that line parallel a little bit more to the face structure, to the jaw structure, to the cheekbones, etc., that's going to be a little bit more on the flattering side because it is going to lift that shape up and give the overall bob a nicer swing. Mistake number 2 is that there's no real layering, especially in the back. No beveling in that nape is just accentuating more of that eye being pulled down and that kind of strong parallel to the floor look. Even if we didn't bring that line a little bit more angular to the face, for instance, just adding a little bit of beveling in the nape would actually create the illusion that there's more of an angle there and help to start drawing that eye up a little bit more. Okay, now mistake number 3 deals with the actual color. Now, what was the first thing that you noticed when I showed you this photo right here? If you're like me, you noticed her eyes. She has absolutely beautiful eyes. They are very striking. And in reality, that actually lends her to being able to do a lot with her color. The color of her skin tone mixed with her eyes really kind of opens up the palette for her. Now, with that said, I personally would add a bit more dimension to it purely to give the hair a little bit more movement in the shape. Especially if we're a situation where we're not going to be layering the hair a lot and we want it to have a little bit more of that one length kind of geometric look, then we're not really utilizing any sort of layers or anything to give the hair any movement. So a really good place to start giving it texture and movement is actually in dimension within the color. But also I think adding a little bit more dimension will help add a little bit more richness around her face and really actually make her eyes pop even more. Okay, normally I move around here, but I'm actually going to stay right here because I'm kind of digging this view. So yeah. Okay, now, before we jump into what these actual suggestions would look like if she took my suggestions and we modified this a little bit, first off, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button. You don't want to miss these episodes, and a lot of you aren't subscribed that are watching, so join the family. And more important, again, there's a link below if you have not already signed up to be notified when my wife and I will be traveling this year. We're going to meet up with some folks, maybe do some haircuts on the road around the United States. So if that is something you want to be a part of and you want to be notified when we're gone and where we're going to be and all that good stuff, there's a link in the description below so that you can jump on the list and we will make sure that you're notified. Okay, now, with all that said, I'll show you what these suggestions will actually look like. Now, the first thing we talked about was the line and how it parallels the floor, and how I would suggest actually moving that line so it matches the angles a little bit more in the face. So if we actually brought that back length up just a little bit, this is what that would look like. Now here's the interesting thing. It does start to bring that eye up, but it isn't really enough to get us there. Because there's a lack of layering that we talked about, just bringing that length up alone and not beveling the back at all actually almost amplifies the original concerns in some ways. Do you see that? Yes. So here's what would happen if we actually brought that length up and we beveled that back a little bit to start really bringing that shape a bit more together. Now, as you can see here, that eye is no longer being drawn down the back of the shape. Now we're dealing with a situation where we're actually starting to lift that eye up. To me, this does a great job of starting to accentuate cheek structure, start to accentuate jaw structure, and really start to just lift the shape up and give it a little bit more life. And now, the third thing we talked about was the coloring, just kind of the lack of the dimension. And I wouldn't even dramatically change when we're adding dimension, but if we did add some lowlights, this is what that would look like. Now, this is the perfect example. This isn't a situation where we need to see night and day. This is again a situation of a small change, but I believe to be a pretty large impact. It gives the hair a little bit more dimension. Here's the front as well as the profile. But if you look at it, it actually helps, in my opinion, to bring her eyes out more and really kind of show off the overall style. It's not that the color doesn't work, it's that this, to me, enhances more of her face, of her eyes, and of the overall style and shape. Okay, now let's talk about some curveballs, and this... Okay, I'm laughing because I know it's coming, and, well, you don't, but you're about to find out. When we're thinking about curveballs, this, again, was one of the reasons that I think this is actually a very tough episode for me specifically. If we look at the front here, this is not broken. And I actually think it's a shape that works very well for a multitude of different reasons. So we're in a situation where curveballs really become more of a just to change it up, but not necessarily to make it better. A bob length at this length range for your particular face shape actually works really well, and also gives you the versatility of being able to pull your hair back and still work with it a little bit more on the days that you don't want to style it. If I were going to switch things up, I might switch things up with the color. She really can wear a multitude of different colors. So what I wanted to do with this was show you kind of how dramatic you could go. Now, let me just back this up before I even show you these photos. This is to show drama specifically. So this is one option, slightly different. Here's another option, again slightly different. The pastel kind of pink color, I actually love that color. Again, completely out of left field, right? Probably doesn't make sense. But my point again with these is they are curveballs just to show you how far things can be taken. Part of what makes this funky, edgy kind of look work is because the cut isn't hyper edgy. The cut is still somewhat more on the conservative or polished side. So when you add a kind of out of the left field color to that, those two yin and yang actually have a way of playing against each other very well. And it kind of lends itself to not going totally overboard. So again, I don't necessarily know that I would say this is the direction you need to move. It's just to show you some options. But as always, I'm really curious to hear what you think. What are your thoughts? Honestly, what are your thoughts? Do you think she should do a pastel? Do you think it would look insane? Do you think she should go for it? It's so out of left field. I totally get it. With that said, comment below, let me know what you think. Otherwise, thanks for hanging out. I am going to enjoy this because it doesn't suck. It just doesn't. See you next week. Bye.